Well, thank you, Senator, for coming in to meet with the editorial board. And we always like to thank candidates for running. Thank you for your service in the legislature and for being willing to run, put yourself out there before voters and offer to serve as governor of the state. We've got a number of questions that we'll be asking you, and we will start off with education, which is super important to the Seattle Times editorial board, and I heard something about paramount duty of the Washington State as well. So a dozen years ago, the state Supreme Court ruled that the state's education finance system was unconstitutional. Though the legislature poured billions into education, profound funding inequities still persist between schools, between school districts, communities. Do you have any ideas for how to fix that?
Well, I think part of the frustration, you take the 2017 McCleary law where we capped local levies at $1.50 per thousand. That was the same level we levy equalized to. So at that point, it was kind of like every district, basically, you pass a bond, you're going to get levy equalized to that sort of rate. And I think it was frustrating because the 2019 session, when we picked up more seats after the 2018 election, they raised that $1.50 limit up to $2.50. They also put in kind of a higher exemption for the Seattle School District at $3,000. So I think this kind of highlights where I think voters have a distrust because we kind of did this grand bargain. You're gonna have higher state property taxes, basically $1 per thousand of assessed. You're gonna have lower local levies. And obviously we didn't keep that promise because 2 years later we undid it. I think now, going forward, I don't see any way to lower people down. Like there are ways where you gotta think increase levy equalization to try to bring up the floor. I just don't think there's a way in our current environment to lower the ceiling. And then I think it becomes this challenge. And I'm not saying I have the silver bullet on this. I think our ultimate challenge is we're a local control state. We push the money out. How do you make sure the money is being invested in programs that are gonna change kids' lives? And so I really think even though the districts don't love it, it really comes down to, as we make further investments, it's all about the sideboards you put on the dollar. So we had tried to increase paraeducator pay, so we pushed out money this session we just finished. We tried to put sideboards on it, and I'm very curious what happens when they go to bargain this summer. Is that money gonna end up going to increase paraeducator pay, or is it gonna end up going to backfill, deficits that were created through other people maybe not making smart financial decisions? And I don't know, if it doesn't, it's a tough problem. Like I proposed a bill in 2019 to basically say local levies can't be used to enhance COLAs above the state level, and it was like I was proposing, the end of the earth sort of thing. It got a lot of pushback, and so you have to acknowledge the political dynamics you're dealing with. And I think right now it's just you can put additional money in to raise the floor up, but there's a moral hazard challenge. If you keep bailing out districts that don't do a good job managing their finances, how are districts going to have an incentive to manage their finances?
Okay. And when you said COLA, you were talking about cost of living
adjustment.
increase.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the Washington rates among the highest states with college degrees per capita. The state's own children pursue such higher education or certifications at much lower rates than other states. How can we close that gap and ensure our students are trained and qualified for the state's well-paying jobs?
We have the best financial aid program of any state in the country to send people to college, yet we have like the lowest amount of people going to college, and you lay down at night trying to understand like what could be driving that dynamic, and I think part of it, well, first off, my focus has been this dual credit area. Like I put a lot of time and energy in having the state pay for college and the high school classes. Prior to last year, if you wanted to take college and high school, you had to cough up $330, and so there'd be 30 kids in a class, 15 would pay the $330. 15 didn't have $330 to pay. Didn't matter what your grade in the class was. You can get an A in the class, you got no college credit because you hadn't paid. So that problem we did fix through the bill that I sponsored last session. I think we haven't really done the same for fees and running start. So I do think anything we can do to have the state encourage people to get college credit when they're in high school, I do think plants the seed in them that they're capable of actually succeeding in, school after they finish high school. I don't know if it's the minimum wage laws, like an unintended consequence where people feel like, I'll be honest, like I have my Ben and Jerry's stores and my pizza restaurant, like after tips, a lot of my staff are all, they can make $25 an hour working at a restaurant. And I don't know if like this provides less of an incentive for people to feel like they have to invest in their own human capital, because there's kind of this allure of, I can start making good money right away. But at the end of the day, I want my own kids. I mean, I have 3 kids in college now. I have 3 still, 2 in high school, 1 in 8th grade. But I think this dual credit space offers opportunities of really saying we're going to do everything we can at the state level to give them those opportunities. I think the apprenticeship training programs like Core Plus, they've shown success of people getting hands-on experience. I think when you talk to some people in the education space, there's a guy who used to be on the Seattle School Board a long time ago named Don Nielsen. And I think he talks about the idea of like innovative school districts, where you basically give flexibility to school districts who want to just try stuff completely out of the box. And to me, that's an interesting concept. Some other states have tried that innovative school district concept where it's not forced on any district, but if you do have a school district that says, hey, I want some flexibility to try some other things to see if we can move the needle of getting more kids, post-secondary, activities, I'm completely open to that idea as well. So I think it's just going into it with an open mind that the status quo isn't working. Mm-hmm. So we got to start trying some different things.
So many lawmakers that are members of your party are opposed to charter school funding. Many don't even talk about them as if they're public schools. What are your thoughts on charter schools? What would be your approach? And also, do you think charter schools should have similar funding to public schools?
So I sponsored the bill this session to provide them the same levy equalization that every school gets. That bill did not make it out. It made it out of policy, did not make it out of Senate Ways and Means. So then all my energy at that point went into the budget. And what I did get in the budget that passed, so this is the first time we've done this, every charter school kid getting equalized to $1,500 per pupil, which isn't, we started out at $1,500 for every kid back when McCleary happened, 2017, but because it constantly adjusts, that's grown to $1,950 now. So there's still sort of like a $400 gap between what we're giving the charter school kids and what other public school kids are getting equalized at. But I think once the schools started opening, I started visiting the schools. I was like, here we have schools. They're getting amazing outcomes for low-income families of color who were not finding success in our traditional public school system. They are finding success in the charter school system. And, I've supported, opening the window back up so we can get to the full 40 schools. I think the only reason we didn't get to 40 is because the WEA kept filing lawsuits, so it got tied up in this legal morass with the Supreme Court. So I've supported opening the window up. I've supported equal funding. I made progress on the equal funding this time. And it's an issue it would be great to have a governor who puts out a budget that treats all public schools equally. That would be really refreshing to have that budget be the blueprint that everybody works off of. And then you really shift your focus on to getting that window open back up again. And we've had accountability. We've had mistakes from these charter schools. I think you guys have chronicled those mistakes. But that's the thing. You can't expect every school to be perfect as long as you have a system that's going to pick out the schools that are doing things wrong and either fix them or close them. Then I think our system's working. I still feel like we have one of the best models for public charter schools in the country. I'm actually proud of what we've done here in Washington, and it's just hypocritical for Democrats. Like, it's hilarious. I'm the longest serving member of the Senate Education Committee. I've been on there 12 years. My wife's a public school teacher. All 6 of our kids in public schools. And you have these families. They're testifying. Democrats keep saying we care about, equalizing and providing families of color the best opportunity for success in the state of Washington, yet we refuse to give them that same opportunity for one reason, and that's because of the power of the WEA of opposing, and they told me they weren't gonna sign in against my bill this year. Lo and behold, they signed in against the bill in policy committee, and then I went and met with them, and I said, for the love of God, can you please just be neutral in Ways and Means? And they said, well, think about it, and then they signed in against in Ways and Means. And this had nothing, wouldn't have impacted anything for all the other public schools. Like, they wouldn't have gotten any less money. This was just equalizing charter schools, and I still, even in that scenario, cannot get the WA to be neutral on the bill.
Josh.
Let's talk about the Climate Commitment Act for a minute. You were part of the coalition that brought about, and the passage was by a very narrow margin. Your yes vote propelled it to create the state's cap and trade system, cap and invest, if you like. How are you going to vote on Initiative 2117 this fall, and why?
I'm not supporting the initiative. It's, of the three, I am supporting the other two in terms of long-term care and capital gains. I'm not supporting the repeal of the Climate Commitment Act because we actually gave flexibility to the governor's office via, they pick who's running Department of Ecology, right? To manage how you run the auctions. And this was, I vividly remember getting into session in January of 23, meeting with Department of Ecology saying, what's going on here, you guys? Like, other states ban speculators in the initial launch of these programs. Other states have phased in transportation fuels to minimize kind of the impact on consumers of the pump during the early stages of the program. Other states have had lower cost caps to make sure that we don't have escalation right out of the gate. I'm like, you guys aren't doing any of these things. And I'm like, Mark, don't worry about it. Like, it'll be okay. And so I think my frustration was I feel like I highlighted to Inslee's administration the risk in 2023 of what they were doing. And so we had a bill with a fiscal note of $23 when we passed it. California is the state we're trying to link with. Their auctions were literally going off at $26 in January 23. We had a $3 difference. So we weren't exactly right, but we were pretty damn close. To have our auctions go $48, $56, $63, it was hubris. I think it was hubris on the Inslee administration to just say, I'm going to get as much money in this account as humanly possible, and I'm not going to really worry about how much people are having to pay for gas. The $63 auction price of August of last year was literally an extra 52 cents a gallon on every gallon of gas purchased in the state of Washington. And I felt my frustration is the person who can't afford to live in Issaquah, lives in Puyallup, is now being penalized the most because they have a longer commute, and so they have to buy more gas. They can't buy necessarily electric cars. They can't even buy cars sometimes that are hybrid. They get better mileage. They're buying traditional cars that don't get great mileage. They have longer commutes, and they're the ones who I think really got hit with this extra 52 cents a gallon. Right now, if it wasn't for the only reason the last auction went off at $25 is because of the initiative. So it's artificially low. Like, when you look at the fiscal note when we passed our bill back in March of how we made, and I chair the capital budget, so I'm investing hundreds of millions of dollars of these Climate Commitment Act dollars. The fiscal note assumes that the prices explode after if the initiative does not pass. It assumes we go back up to that $63 price point in terms of where the auctions will be generating. This, to me, is why it's really important, because I think the governor's office, you can basically say those auctions could increase at a price similar to, inflation, in the sense that right now, the last one went off around $25. You could gradually increase that auction in a way where you're making sure you're not going back to the summer of 23 where people are paying an extra 50 cents a gallon. Even in that scenario, the governor's office, you can keep the bill intact, and you can generate hundreds of millions of dollars to fight climate change, and you can substantially lower the price of gas. And so, to me, I'm not supporting that initiative because I'm optimistic that in the governor's office, I have flexibility. I have no flexibility on long-term care, none. The rate's 58 cents, for every, $100 you make, you pay that 0.58%. I have no flexibility in the capital gains tax. And so, in my mind, the only one of those initiatives where the governor actually has full flexibility of what the impacts end up being for Washington consumers is the Climate Commitment Act. And so we've got it in place. I would rather see it stay there, but just run with a lens of affordability as opposed to the current program.
But you're saying that essentially it will go back up if 2117 fails.
But I, as governor, I would have the ability to prevent that from happening.
And you would do it with a less steep curve. That's what we're talking about? Okay.
So Inslee's he's front-loaded his emissions at 7% annual reductions to try to get a 50% reduction by 2030. That was a bumper sticker. That wasn't grounded in any public policy about what we could actually achieve. That was just, I want to basically put on the bumper sticker, we reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. Like, it ignored the fact that we were pricing out a lot of average working families in the state. And so my proposal this session, which didn't pass because Ensley said he would veto it, was just to make it a linear curve where you reach the same target in 2050. You just don't try to front load all your progress into the first 6 years of the program. You actually blend out the progress over time, and I'm optimistic technology in this space, it'll be easier to make progress, I think, on some of these things 10 or 15 years from now than it is right now, where you can reduce the emissions without actually having the same impacts on the consumers on the cost side. You just have to do it more gradually, which doesn't fit on the bumper sticker, but I think is actually better public policy.
Moving on to Washington State ferries. Obviously, ferries is, as you're well aware, a mess right now. There are at least 3 runs that operate at service levels nowhere near where they used to. And I'm curious, from your perspective, the legislature's done so much to address in 2023 and 2024 the ferry system, but there are still going to need to be 16 vessels built by the year 2040. We have a number of retiring vessels, and only 5 are assumed to be built with a $1.3 billion budget. Do you think that it would be prudent to pursue another course such as traditional diesel ferries to essentially augment and restore the badly depleted bench?
We got to get boats online, and so I think, whatever gets boats online the quickest. So I've been pretty vocal and critical of Ensley on this whole thing. I actually think trying to retrofit a ferry right now to hybrid electric is like you're divorced from reality. When you're spending money to retrofit, when that money should be focused on getting a new boat online, it just shows that you're not actually factoring in what's happening in the average lives of Washington residents. And so I am 100% on board. I think when I read your question, my challenge was, if we show up in the 25 session and we got to figure out, can you speed up delivery of boats by having that flexibility? And so I think it's going to depend where they're at, but we got to get boats online, and I think the numbers you highlighted are accurate. And I was part of this. There was 3 senators involved in the 22 transportation package. We spent 9 months negotiating it. I say I became kind of an honorary member of the Ferry Caucus during that conversation. Part of that was because I knew the best way to take billions of dollars out of the transportation budget the operating budget from Christine Rolfes was to say we're going to invest in ferries. So we made a big ferry investment in that package, but once again, it gets hijacked, I felt like, from the governor's office by insisting the only bill he's going to sign is hybrid electric ferries or nothing. And so this is where you have to have more flexible approach going forward.
And did I hear you right that converting to hybrid electrics you would pull back on?
I would focus my money on building new boats. I think new boats are the priority right now, not converting to hybrid electric ferries that are currently. And this is our challenge. And once again, the bumper sticker sounds great. We're converting all our ferries to hybrid electric. It doesn't sound great when your ferry doesn't show up and you're sitting there and you missed your doctor's appointment. Yeah.
Lastly, I was wondering about you with the advent of electric hybrid vehicles. Our gas taxes you just touched on. We're going to be facing lower and lower revenues that way. What's your plan to replace those revenues to keep the transportation budget whole in the future?
So right now I think it's 49.4 cents a gallon. I think is our state gas tax. My simple math I use is every penny of gas tax is roughly $35 million of tax revenue. That's usually pretty accurate. So basically you have about $1.7 billion coming in annually from gas tax. The extra markup on electric car tab renewal is $225 right now. So you basically have 7 million cars out there. This is like, people have to be really careful because there's people that say we have to use vehicle miles traveled. Like we have to shift to vehicle miles traveled, and they say the gas tax is going away. Like this is the only way we can save our infrastructure. Well, they're ignoring the fact that you do actually replace a lot of your lost gas tax revenue when people switch to an electric car and have the extra $225 fee on their tab, and you're only off by a couple $100 million. I think the challenge to me is the current investments in infrastructure are not cutting it. Like if I went back to my life, I was currency trader at UBS and Bank of America for 13 years. Like currency trading, you're looking at how do you determine long-term trends of how a country's economy is going to grow for like the next 10 or 15 years. And what I found during my 13 years working at UBS and Bank of America, that was in London and New York, countries who invest in infrastructure have better long-term growth rates because their economy grows more sustainably longer over time. And back then in the 90s and 2000s, we were looking at the infrastructure investments that Asia was making, and I was like, these countries are going to have high growth rates based on our analysis, and it proved out. And so I think the challenge is the operating budget. When I got elected, my first budget was 2013, $34 billion operating budget. The one we passed last month was $71 billion. So in a very short period of time, we saw the operating budget more than double. The transportation budget has been flatlining, but the investments and the cost of doing these projects is increasing significantly. And this is where it reminds me of this idea when I got there where the Republicans said we want to lower college tuition. The Democrats were like, oh, that's a horrible idea. And I was like, what are you talking about? A Republican suggested it. And I was like, I don't know about you. I got a lot of kids. Like, I like this idea and I vote for it. And this is the pushback. Like, the Republicans have been saying, like, we should be shifting sales tax on vehicles to the transportation budget. And they're right. I mean, talk about a progressive way to make infrastructure investments. You live in Issaquah. You buy a $60,000 SUV. You just put $6,000 in transportation budget. You live in Puyallup, you buy a $10,000, 2012 Volkswagen Jetta, you put $1,000 in transportation budget. To me, that sounds very progressive as a way to make investments when you're saying the price of your car is going to determine how much goes into the transportation budget. And that $1.5 billion a year we currently get in sales tax on vehicles, you can't hit the operating budget overnight with that. But if you go back to the change in the operating budget we've seen during my not that long time in the Senate, you could phase in that $1.5 billion without having to fire a bunch of people and close a bunch of programs, and the world's not ending. I just think you have to be thoughtful. So we just have to be a better financial partner with our operating budget to the budget that is in desperate need, because I think even if the electric vehicle offsets the gas tax, that doesn't change the reality that we're not making the infrastructure investments that are going to let the Washington state economy achieve its full potential. It needs more transportation dollars.
A couple questions on behavioral health and a couple questions on housing homelessness. So in 2018, as you know, Western State Hospital lost federal certification from the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. And it was at the time, I think it was estimated to cost the state about $53 million. Same year, 2018, Governor Inslee and a group of lawmakers presented a plan to transform the mental health system by 2023. 2023 came around and 22 counties filed a lawsuit against DCHS for saying they were providing inadequate mental health care for people found incompetent to stand trial. So I wanted to ask you, what would you do differently to administer Western State?
Well, part of this goes back to in the 2015 budget, we actually did pass a thing to gradually start shifting people out of Western State into smaller 16-bed community-located facilities. It was actually an Andy Hill proposal. And Washington Federation of State Employees, WFSE, actually went to Inslee and said, you should veto that because our members work at Western State, and he did veto that proposal. So I found it ironic, like that entire loss of that $53 million a year was actually avoidable, I think, if we had actually not had the veto of that exact same line item during the 2015 session. And I will hold Inslee, in my mind, accountable for that chaos that he created. I think now we are here. We are where we are, right? I chair the capital budget. We put $600 million into Western State with basically a promise we're going to finish it. To finish it's going to take another $250 to $300 million, depending whether you want to do solar panels now or solar panels later. And so you have to finish that project, obviously. That's not even a choice. So got to finish Western State. That's going to help. It's 300. It gets a lot of beds online. I think, to me, the epiphany on the capital budget side is, and I think I mentioned this in my answer, the ability to partner with local tribes when it comes to accessing behavioral health, because the Bureau of Indian Affairs reimbursement rate for tribal-run facilities is so much better than the Medicaid reimbursement rate. And this is what changes everything. So you look at Olympic Heritage Hospital, the one we bought in Tukwila, which is actually like 2 blocks where I grew up. It used to be called Cascade after it closed. Our headache isn't the capital dollars on Cascade. Our headache has been the fact that it's going to cost us $135 million to run the facility between now and the end of the fiscal year on June 30th of 25. And so I think the more we actually prioritize our capital budget investments to basically work with every tribe throughout the state to try to get behavioral health facilities up and running at that tribal level, I think it's going to be critical. I think then it's just you have to become the financial partner with cities, well, in this case, a lot of it's counties, right, to make sure they have the resources to actually get these competency evaluations done in a timely manner. And this is, I think it's hard when the state does this because people naturally want to, it's sexier to start new programs. I mean, you get a press conference and you get all the adulation from starting a new program. I mean, I go to Democratic events. You know, I was at one, Reich Dahl stood up and said, every kid should get free lunch. And I've got my Ways and Means hat on. I'm like, okay, well, that's $320 million in the budget cycle to give every kid. Right now, every kid who wants a free lunch is already getting a free lunch. Like, my kids have to pay for lunch. And then vice versa, Pelliciotti gets up and says, I want every kid born on Medicaid to get $4,000. And I'm like, okay, well, that's $640 million in the budget cycle. So I think our challenge right now in Olympia is we have these core functions of government that aren't being done necessarily at the state level. They're being done at the local level. They don't have any resources to do these right now. The state has to be a better financial partner, but that means the state has to hit a pause button of showing up every 2 years and kind of starting a bunch of new programs that may or may not actually improve the state of Washington and really go back to saying our focus is going to be these core functions of government, whether it's happening at the state level or the local level. We want to make sure they're getting done. And I think these competency evaluations are a poster child of that, where, you know, we're going to have to make sure they're being done in a timely fashion. And, you know, we were able to avoid a lot of the loss of that $53 million in federal revenue by rerouting people to Eastern State Hospital. But if Eastern State were to be decertified, there is no way to save any of that money. And so it's really important that we make those investments to avoid having Eastern decertified, which we have avoided for the time being. And Western State will be up and running, and hopefully it's kind of all of the above. You do your traditional community beds, you put the tribal partnerships on steroids, and hopefully get as many of those going in the next 5 to 10 years as humanly possible. And at the same time, you make sure Eastern State doesn't lose its certification and you get access. My understanding is the second we open Western State, it will be recertified. And I toured it. I think I'm optimistic that assessment is correct.
Do you support changing or lowering the threshold for civil commitment?
I think this is a tough one. I do support making it easier to have people civilly committed. I think when you talk to families in our state who have a family member going through a crisis, they often find that they're better off to go to Oregon to have the person receive the treatment they need, because in Washington it is really hard. Now, that being said, I'm not gonna ignore the fact that that is a very tricky issue, right? Because you are taking away someone's rights by having them committed against their will a lot of times because their family members are convinced that this is the best way to keep them safe. I do think that the current system in Washington is probably one of the hardest in the country, I think, to have someone, you know, involuntarily committed. And I think we have to revisit it because I think it's just not working the way it could.
On homelessness, there's some stats out there that show some of the bigger pipelines into homelessness come from those who are exiting the state prison system and those who are exiting the state foster care system. Given that those two would be under your purview as governor, how would you stop these streamlining pipelines into homelessness?
So, you know, I worked with Reuben Carlisle for a long time. Reuben Carlisle kind of opened my eyes to the importance of foster care investments. And I actually think, you know, there's things that I think Democrats should be proud of that we've actually done really well in our state during my time there. Our improvement on the foster care side is one of them. You know, we provide funding for people to stay in that system longer. than when I got elected back in 2012. I think those things have been positive changes. I don't know if those positive changes that we've invested in the foster care system have played out in the stats you're referring to, but I do think we're moving in the right direction of the state doing a better job of financially investing in the foster care system and basically just giving a better runway and flexibility for these kids to feel like they can still have a partnership from the state, and it's not just so arbitrarily based on what age they happen to have hit. From the prison side, it's, I guess what I've, and I tour prisons as the chair of the capital budget. When I was in Walla Walla last year, like they have the Walla Walla Community College. It's like literally inside it's inside the Walla Walla State Penitentiary, and they have teachers come in, and these people are taking classes, and it was kind of eye-opening to me that I think this is the mentality we really have to embrace is when people are in that prison system, there's programs that give them the ability to become an electrician. Like every person who comes out of prison that has a license to become an electrician is not becoming homeless because they actually end up having a job because there's such demand for those fields. And so I guess my hope on the prison side is you really focus on the opportunities you're giving people. I know it sounds counterintuitive to a lot of Washington residents to say they've committed a crime against society and now you're going to basically give them free college while they're there, but you have to, I think, look at it through the larger picture, which is you're rehabilitating them the best chance of success to actually get off the social safety net and be able to survive on their own. And that's why I think you have to take advantage of that time while they are incarcerated to give them every tool to be successful when they get out. And that's why I've been really supportive of those apprenticeship programs, the community college programs that are happening in our prisons. I actually think they're good.
Over the last couple of years, the governor and legislature have put more than $2.4 billion of Washingtonians' money into homelessness and addressed the housing shortage. But a recent poll showed that 65% believe that housing costs would continue to escalate regardless of construction. So how do you guarantee Washingtonians that they're getting bang for the buck for the billions of dollars put into housing?
I think if I was to be critical of the legislature, I think our challenge is we'll put $100 million into homelessness, and then we pat ourselves on the back, and we're like, hey, we're great people. Like, aren't we doing the right thing? To me, the challenge is when we leave, it's a citizen legislature. Now the legislature is left, it's really incumbent upon the executive branch to make sure you're actually getting bang for your buck out of that $100 million investment. And to me, this is my hope is that you really bring accountability to the investments we're doing in the housing space, and this is across the entire board. And I think you just can't, we do not have the capacity to solve this problem without creating partnerships with the private sector to build housing. And I know people, like I saw the article you referenced this past month where on that poll, people said, it doesn't matter how much housing you build, I don't think housing costs will go down. It's not so much we're trying to physically lower housing costs, we are trying to lower housing inflation. So I am 100% convinced that if right now we're building 45,000 units a year and we're trying to get to 55,000 units, I think if we get to that 55,000 unit goal, you will see housing inflation go down significantly. I am 100% convinced of that. And, there doesn't mean that's solving all of the problems, but at a start, anything you do that leads to fewer housing units under construction in the state of Washington is going to send you in the wrong direction. And so I think where my approach is a little bit different is I chair the capital budget. I'll do $1 billion. I did $500 million in the housing trust fund the last 2 years, and that's under my chairmanship of the budget. It's the largest investment housing trust fund's ever seen in a budget cycle. But I just know that's not enough. Like, that's why I was supportive of all the bills we did in the 23 session. Like, we did a bill around sleeper reform. We did a bill around middle housing. We did a bill around ADUs, expedited permitting. I think all those bills we did, to me, I was proud of our housing investments in that 23 session because not only did the capital budget do its robust investments to make sure we had people kind of at that 60% average median income have access to housing, but we did a lot of things that I think without us having to put any money in, just by streamlining the system, is going to build a lot of units in that 80 to 120% of average median income. And I know people say they don't think housing costs will go down, but I think housing inflation can go down substantially. And I think, if you were to look at the Twin Cities, who I think was the poster child of attracting residential housing in 2018 and 2019, and they were the only jurisdiction not to have housing inflation in 2022, the only one, because when people try to raise someone's rent, they're like, hey, I'm gonna go across the street. Like, there's a new unit opening up, and I think I'll take that one at the same rent I'm currently paying. And so I think from that Twin Cities example, we know when you bring housing units online in a large and meaningful way, it does lower housing inflation. And I think that should be our goal. Yeah, we can't, I don't think it's a realistic goal to say we're gonna reduce everyone's rent by $300 a month. Like, our goal is just, incomes are going up. If we can have a sustained stretch of minimal housing inflation, our region will become more affordable because incomes will continue to rise. As long as we can slow housing inflation, it'll be a huge win.
Thank you.
Washington is expected to have another record year of deaths from fentanyl. And the state legislature has passed legislation that has allowed law enforcement and hospitals to detain children if a parent is suspected of abuse or neglect while on opioids. And other cities and the state as well has adopted ordinances that allow for life-saving measures such as Narcan to be used, publicly available. As governor, what ideas would you propose that would focus on drug use prevention?
I feel like I said this in my written answers I responded, and I saw your editorial, and I felt like you guys had mentioned secure substance abuse treatment facilities, which to me has been everything I've been focused on, I think, in that space. And so, and I look at secure substance abuse treatment, I think you guys referenced, Ricky's Law, which I think is designed on a smaller scale towards people who, people really feel are at risk to harming themselves through substance abuse. I kind of view as an alternative to the criminal justice, like instead of putting someone in jail who's using drugs in public, I think my hope was you really create this robust system in our state of secure substance abuse treatment facilities. I don't know if it's 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, probably depends on the case. But that to me is removing this option when you feel withdrawal symptoms, you can walk out the front door. Because fentanyl, I think, is so powerful that everyone walks out the front door the second they start going through those withdrawal symptoms. So I think we have to have a different solution based on the drugs we're currently dealing with. In terms of the prevention side, you can do stuff, I think, in the K-12 system to really emphasize the risk from fentanyl, but I think everyone has to have their eyes wide open that you're not gonna see the benefits of that for 5 to 7 years down the road, I don't think. And so I don't think we're in a situation where we can put all our eggs just in the basket of we're going to focus on prevention in the school system. I think it has to be parallel tracks where you can make those investments to really make sure kids understand the risks and dangers of fentanyl. And those bills usually pass, 98-0, 49-0. Everyone's on board with those bills. Are not politically difficult to pass. I think the political challenge is going to be really having accountability for public drug use, which means I think if you walk down 3rd Avenue, if you had secure substance abuse treatment facilities where people using drugs in public were actually getting put into these facilities, I think a year later, 3rd Avenue looks substantially different than it does right now. That's my firm belief. And I actually, additionally, will say I think it's 10 times more compassionate to actually get people treatment that has a high probability of beating their addiction than just let them basically live on the streets until they overdose. And I think, to me, the state, when we talk about us being a better financial partner with local cities and counties, this is a real opportunity. And I think you can do both, where you focus on the prevention side in the K-12 system, but at the same time, you have real accountability for public drug use. It involves people getting treatment where the front door is locked.
And the issue of policing, the legislature has passed Initiative 2113 that further scales back restrictions on police pursuit to allow police officers to chase people if they feel they have a reasonable suspicion that the person has violated the law and threatens the safety of others. Some Democrats say that will endanger the lives because it will allow police officers to chase somebody for any reason, even expired tab or something like that. Do you agree with the legislature's?
Yeah, I was a co-sponsor of that bill. This is a tough thing because we have procedural votes in Olympia. And in 22 session, we had a procedural vote of whether or not the bill around police pursuit should be allowed to come up for the Senate. And it happened in the last week of session. And it was really tough because leadership said, hey, procedural vote, don't vote with, because it's sitting on the floor calendar. The police pursuit bill in 22 was sitting on the floor calendar. And Andy Billy realized the Republicans are bringing it up for a vote. And I said, I don't care, guys. I'm voting with the Republicans on the procedural motion to demand an up or down vote on this police pursuit bill. This was back in 22, because I want to vote on it. And I spend my life in Olympia counting votes. I know it has the votes. And so I think you're actually quashing, democracy right now by not letting it come up for a vote. Well, I was the only Democrat that did that. The other, obviously, so it failed on a 22-27 procedural vote. It did not come up for a vote. We then did the watered down version in the 23 session. I was a co-sponsor of that watered down version. And then when I came into session this year, I was the one arguing as loud as I could that we should just pass the initiative because it's got the votes. And I think it passed the Senate 38-11. I will say, to me, this is the beauty of it. Issaquah, there's a lot of cities and jurisdictions that have very restrictive police pursuit policies. But the criminals never realized that. And so there was a high degree of compliance when the police pulled somebody over. They never tried to drive away because it wasn't until the 21 session when we passed the bill, and this is where I got to raise my hand. I voted for the bill because, everyone had these restrictive policies. So I thought, okay, if we just kind of line up where half of our jurisdictions already are on a statewide level, that's not that crazy. Where I messed up is it then was the front page of the Seattle Times that police can't pursue you anymore, and all of a sudden the compliance fell off the radar, like right away. And that's when I was like, okay, raising my hand, we messed that one up. And that was in the summer of 21. Like the second it went live, I was talking to all my police chiefs, between Issaquah, Snoqualmie, Maple Valley, the whole East King County area I represent. I was like, hey, mea culpa, we got it wrong. Let's go fix it. I mean, you can't get everything right, but you have to have intellectual honesty to admit when you screw something up and actually go back and fix it. So this is why I've been so passionate, I think, on fixing that police pursuit issue, because I know that was an issue that I got wrong. And I voted, I think, on the wrong side of that issue in the 21 session, and then I made it incumbent upon myself to really push to get it fixed. And this is what everyone has to understand on my side who argues, my argument to the 11 senators who voted against the initiative. The local jurisdictions can still have the same restrictive policies they had before. It's not like there's no preemption of what you can do at the local level of how restrictive you want to be. So it's nice in the sense that I think the average, person who doesn't want to follow law is now thinking, I can get chased. So I'm going to comply with the police because I don't want to make my life harder because I'm trying to run away from them. I know they will find me. But the reality is these other jurisdictions still have those same restrictive policies in place, but people aren't tracking the nuances of every RCW at the local level, right? So it's like, I feel like we got the best of both worlds by passing the initiative where jurisdictions that want to have less, more restrictive police pursuit policies, they can have them. And King County, probably gonna have it. And Seattle, probably gonna have it. And so it's gonna be up to those jurisdictions what they decide to do, but I think the compliance is gonna increase immediately from here on going forward. So that's why I supported it.
A few states have passed bills on to get rid of qualified immunity. And it's come up 3 times, I think, 21, 22, and 23. 22, 23, and didn't even get traction this year on a bill to get rid of qualified immunity in the state of Washington. What's your view on that?
I don't support it. And I'll say why. I know it's a complicated issue, and it's difficult for me because I own a Ben & Jerry's franchise, and Ben & Jerry, this is like their national issue they go around the country advocating for, is getting rid of qualified immunity. So these are really awkward conversations because they've actually been to my ice cream store in Issaquah. I'm like, sorry guys, I'm not with you on this one. I think right now we have a staffing crisis in public sector. Like, it is a crisis. So the lens in my mind, from a public policy perspective, we have to have is every bill we pass that makes it harder to retain or recruit police officers, we have to hit a pause button on and say this is not the right time to to be passing legislation that's make it harder to recruit or retain police officers in the state of Washington. And so to me, that's why I haven't supported that. I haven't supported the independent prosecutor bill in Ways and Means. I voted, it didn't come out of Ways and Means because I didn't support it along with Senator Vanderweg. And I had the same reasoning on the independent prosecutor bill, where my fear was these bills passed. Law enforcement, I think, already feels the legislature is out to get them. The governor's office is out to get them. Nobody's got their back. I think that's their general sense right now. So I think we just have to tread really carefully on any bills that are going to put fuel on that fire and that sentiment. And it's hard because I talk to people where their grandpa was a cop, their dad was a cop, they're a cop, and they don't want their own kid to go into law enforcement because they feel like it's kind of this profession in the state of Washington that doesn't have the appreciation it deserves. And I think that's the mindset we just have to change. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy. And I always use the example, my wife teaches elementary school. I think the people most pissed off at her school when there's a bad teacher are the other teachers. Like, you have to have a system to hold bad apples accountable, 100% on board with making sure you can get rid of bad teachers the same way, I want to be able to get rid of bad police officers, but I just don't like the idea of assuming because a department has a bad officer, the whole department's bad, or that they have a bad officer. Obviously, the worst thing you can do is reduce funding for a school or a police agency. And so I think this is where my approach might be a little different than the traditional Democratic approach on these issues.
You did mention a little bit about the two initiatives, but we do have a couple questions
Yeah.
for that. Melissa.
Yeah, getting back to a couple of the initiatives. Initiative 2124, which would allow people to opt out of long-term care. You had said in your questionnaire that there are 10 better uses of the at least 10 maybe, better uses of the $930 million that we've raised so far. What are some of those 10 alternatives? And if we don't require folks to be part of a long-term care program, then doesn't the program just fail? What's your solution to that?
So I voted against the bill in 2019, and so I didn't support the bill to begin with. And the bill I've been working on for my entire time in the Senate, that finally was the next to last bill that passed in the 21st session, was called Washington Saves. Washington Saves is a model of the Oregon Saves system, and basically it's a very simple bill which says every employer has to offer a payroll deduction to get put into a Roth IRA for their staff members. So if you're a company like Boeing or Microsoft, you already have a retirement plan, just ignore the bill. Like, it's no company that has any retirement plan is subject to the bill. It's solely targeting industries, companies in the state who currently don't give any of their employees the option to have money taken directly out of their paycheck and put into a retirement vehicle. And to me, I focused on that bill because I thought it was a much smarter solution, because that money never touches the state. Like, they can take 5% out of their paycheck. It goes into their own personal Roth IRA, which is just basically a tax-advantaged savings account. And it stays with them. It's portable. Like, they can access it during emergencies. Like, if, they can access it to put a down payment on a house. They can do all these things with that Roth IRA dollars that you can't do with the same long-term care dollars. And everyone benefits, I think, from that policy, because the money is their money. The government never touches it. They're guaranteed to have benefits from every penny they save. And the whole design of this long-term care program was, we knew going in, the majority of the people are going to pay in and not get benefits. That's the reason the program pencils out. It pencils out because there was no portability in the plan when it originally passed. That portability was just added this session solely to try to keep the initiative from passing. And that's the only reason portability got added this session, was in a kind of a Hail Mary attempt to, take out that criticism of the program. I think when you look at, SEIU 775 is the largest supporter of Democrats, basically, in this. SEIU is a giant Democratic supporter. This bill benefited the members of SEIU 775 who do home health care work. They were the primary beneficiaries of this $930 million because they get a collectively bargained directly for those dollars. Like, right now, they're collectively bargaining with the entire soup, right? And so it's not as advantageous for them. They really like the idea of having a dedicated tax source that's really devoted towards home health care. And they now get a collectively bargain for those dollars. And that's why they pushed so aggressively to have this bill passed. But I felt it was obviously great for their members, not great for the rest of the state. I never supported it. You're right. I think making it optional probably means the program goes away. That's just fine by me. I think that, you know, if we want to set up a marketplace similar to what we've done with the healthcare marketplace, where we have long-term care plans that people could buy into and see them standardized and really try to drive volume to what we think are the better private plans to offer, that's great. I obviously put all my time and energy in this Washington Saves program because I think it's a great way to help people prepare not just for long-term care, but for every expense you're going to have when you get older. And so those, I think, are more thoughtful ways than just another 0.58% payroll tax on W-2 income.
Your other favorite thing, capital gains tax, that would be Initiative 2109. You said you're in favor of repealing it, and also that we should use that sort of revenue to lessen tax burden in other areas. So can you elaborate a little bit more on how that might work and how we would basically replace the money that capital gains is bringing in, especially for rural schools construction?
So I think you have, so this is 21 session bill. And so if you go to the capital gains did not pass in the previous years because Dean Tacko was one of the 28 Democrats in the Senate. He didn't support the bill. Dean Tacko then lost his seat, but then Twana Nobles picked up the Steve O'Ban seat. So all of a sudden, even though the margins looked the same on the outside, 28-21, they had changed on that specific bill. So you go into the 21 session, and they're like, hey, we found the 25th vote for capital gains. And I was like, well, hang on a second. Like, we have an $8 billion budget surplus, like the largest budget surplus in the history of the state of Washington. That was a combination of a sales tax state where everyone was buying stuff for COVID, you know, that was generating sales tax. It was also then a combination of all the federal programs that were pushing out stimulus funds. And I said, okay, if you have an $8 billion surplus and you're going to create a new tax, like, this is the best opportunity the state's ever going to have to actually reduce a tax somewhere. And, you know, I was arguing you could get rid of sales tax on clothing. I was arguing for lower property taxes. That lower property taxes I thought was a really valid argument because the entire McCleary fight, like I was in the Senate side of the McCleary fight, the Republicans were in charge of the Senate for that McCleary fight. They kept saying we should be a blend of higher property taxes and capital gains taxes. That's what the House was arguing for that entire McCleary discussion for 5 years. And I was like, well, here's a way you could back into that, basically, because now you're getting the capital gains tax you wanted back in the 2017 session, and you're actually now going to lower the property tax because as we solved McCleary, because we didn't do the capital gains tax in 2017, it was all on the property tax, all of it. And so here was a way to basically go back to what the original House proposal was, but they had no interest. Like, nobody had any interest. And I was like, okay, well, I guess you're going to pass it. You have the 25th vote. I'm not on board with this. I think the $500 million goes into the Education Legacy Trust account. To me, that's basically general fund money. I mean, that is a giant, I mean, we have, as Kate said, our paramount duty is education. So we're going to have to fund education. Like, if we have to do cuts in places, it's going to be in other areas of the budget. And it's kind of like, you know, Social Security and Medicare, like, you're going to find savings somewhere else. And so when they say that money's earmarked for education, I think that's a little disingenuous because, you know, you just end up supplanting and moving the money around. As you highlighted, everything above $500 million does go into school construction. But this is the irony of that. I'm the chair of the capital budget. You know, the governor's capital budget proposal swept every single one of those dollars and moved it into a different program. Every single dollar. And this is where I think voters get frustrated because we told people, oh, everything above $500 million will go into school construction. No, the governor didn't put any of it in school construction. He swept it into other areas of the budget were actually his priority. And then I had to fight the House the entire session. I mean, I had to move heaven and earth just to have that money stay in the school construction budget. And it's really frustrating to me because it's so easy to move these pots of money around and people say they're going to X, but then I've seen those same people propose budgets that sweep that money into other things that they care more about. And so at the end of the day, if it does pass and the tax goes away, obviously it's just a question of the capital budget, which is, you know, we're talking about $4.2 to $4.4 billion. I'm not saying if you lose $300 million out of that, that's not a big hit. But I still feel like you can have robust billion-dollar investments in K-12 schools, and as long as you prioritize those investments in the capital budget. And so I'm optimistic if the initiative does pass that we can survive it without having to do any cuts in the education space. We may have to be more thoughtful about our budgeting in other areas, but in my mind, like to say that that revenue is going to impact just education ignores the fact that we have full flexibility of how we prioritize our investments in Olympia. If education is our priority, that should be our priority. There's a lot of fluff in our budget right now that should go away long before we start cutting any money of education. So we'll see what happens with the initiative. But, I'm trying to be consistent. I oppose the long-term care payroll tax, supporting the initiative. I oppose the capital gains tax, supporting the initiative. I voted for the Climate Commitment Act. I'm not supporting that initiative. And to me, I think people want to see consistency in our elected officials. They don't want to see a windsock of whatever the political winds of the day are, and that's what I've tried to do. And sometimes it makes my life politically miserable. My 2020 election was miserable because of my opposition to the long-term care payroll tax. I mean, it really brought a lot of misery on me, and so, but I don't regret it. I would rather lose my Senate seat doing the right thing than keep my Senate seat just because it's politically expedient to go along with a Democratic stakeholder on an issue that I don't agree with.
Frank?
So we were going to be a little bit self-serving. So I said, Kate, don't let me talk till the end. There are now 3 states in the country who, because the federal government has been incapable of trying to stop the disaster of failed newspapers in this country. And it is a disaster in Washington State, it truly is. There's three states that have actually decided we're going to go ahead with this. And I have to qualify, Cantwell and Murray have been fantastic on this. It's some other people. And one of them is California, and they've got a program going with the University of California where they are training and putting a number of journalists into schools, and the state's paying that. And it's been up for about a year and a half now. Washington State has a modest program.
This is a fellowship program you're talking about?
Yeah, and WSU is acting as, we're working on a lot with them, but they're acting as the administrator. What's the woman's name?
Senator Kaiser?
Yeah, Senator Kaiser.
Yeah, she went to Berkeley, actually.
She's very fond of Berkeley. And the New York Newspaper Guild yesterday or day before announced a really interesting package of grants to go to newspapers, government grants. All of these programs are really nice to see that they're starting, and are most helping and effective rural communities that are really struggling. And this is just a message that our number one thing is saving democracy and saving the free press.
And I mean, I've been supportive, and I've talked to Breyer Dudley about these issues, I think at length over the last few years. I chair JLARC, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee. We review our tax preferences, when they come up. And so, I saw the review of the newspaper preference. It was at 0.35 instead of 0.48. And it was unusual because JLARC staff came back and said, hey, the preference, this is really unusual for them. It wasn't just continue the preference. They said the preference actually probably should be lower than 0.35 because if your goal is to save newspapers, you're not doing enough. And I thought about my own personal kind of situation of, I lost Issaquah Press, I lost my paper in Maple Valley, lost a paper in Snoqualmie, all during my fairly short time.
One of my papers.
Issaquah Press was, I know. And And so it really hit home with me. So that was obviously what spurred me to sponsor the bill to remove the B&O rate. At the same time, we got the fellowship money in the budget. I know we've done wave 1. I think wave 2 is coming. I
think so, yeah.
And so, and it's not a lot of, I mean, I'm not saying it's a ton of bodies, but as I read Breyer kind of update, they're going in these rural communities, a lot of these new reporters, and I'm optimistic. It's a great program. I fully support it. I would never want, I mean, I'm committed to keeping those going forward. If people have other ideas of something that's even more robust than that, like I'm curious to hear it, I guess.
Yeah, we think what's going to happen now, Illinois is apparently, I don't know the details of it, but they're apparently seriously looking at another one, which if they pass it will bring it up to 4. All of them are very different. You know, they all have the same result, but they're all different in how they're being administrated and handled. And we very much appreciate your support, believe me.
It's been a good program.
Yeah.
I mean, gotta give Breyer some credit. Yeah.
And
He works that issue.
in full disclosure, we are not, and none of our 3 newspapers benefit from the program. It's all scaled right now. It's, you know, I take that back. Our Yakima paper has got 1 reporter out of it from WSU, but WSU is the one that made the choice on that.
Yeah. No, I think it's a good program.
Thank you.
Well, one last question we're asking all the candidates we're talking to. Who do you think won the presidency in 2020? And who are you voting for president?
I'm voting for Joe Biden. You know, I was actually the very first elected official in India to endorse Joe Biden in 2019. And so, granted, the other choices were Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. So Joe's my kind of Democrat. No, where I've been most impressed with Biden is on foreign policy. I feel like I liked how we've handled Ukraine. I actually like his response on the Israel-Hamas. I think it's, he supported Israel, but he's also at the same time, I think, putting pressure on where he can, because Netanyahu is, I feel like, a little bit like a Trump equivalent in Israel. He's not being super helpful, but I think, and on the State Investment Board, we get all these people in on all these issues. And these people, unequivocally, nonpartisan people, these are people like Petraeus. He won't even donate. David Petraeus, former general, has never made a political contribution in his life because he never wants to have anyone, and he actually doesn't even vote, he said, because that's how important it is him to stay non-political. And he's like, yeah, he's doing a good job on foreign policy. And so I think from that standpoint, I've been pleased. Yes, would it be nice if he was 20 years younger? It would be. His staff is 20 years younger. I see a lot of smart people in the Biden administration who are not in their 70s or 80s. And so, yeah, I mean, I think at a time, I thought Biden might just do 1 term and say, hey, there's a lot of these great, up and coming people, and I'm just going to do 1 term and focus on the country. But I think after the 22 election cycle, people realized, it wasn't as, Democrats did a lot better in the 22 election cycle because of the Dobbs decision than anyone expected, and I think it created a path for him to go for a 2nd term, and he chose that path, and I'm voting for him.
So we've asked you the questions that we had. Was there anything you want to talk about that we should have asked you about that we didn't? Any thoughts you want to leave us with?
I mean, I think it's, I guess this is, because my most common question is, why are you running? That's a question I get all the time. And so I think for my wife, Kelly, and I, it just comes down to this, you're at this point in our life. Penelope's the youngest kid, she's in 8th grade. We have 6 kids. Isabel's the oldest, she's a junior up at Western in Bellingham. So for the first time in our life, it's like, okay, Isabel's going to be done with school next year, and I have huge anxiety, so does my wife, about how she's going to afford to live here. And so it's hard, I went to Foster High School, graduated in 1990. My dad went to Foster High School, graduated in 61. My wife's dad went to Garfield. Like, our families have been here for generations. And when you're having anxiety that your own kids won't be able to afford to stay and live in the area where you've loved more than anything else on the planet, and I literally was working in finance in London, New York. I moved home specifically to raise my kids here. And if I don't know if that's not a wake up that we need to have a change of how we do things in the governor's office, I don't know what is, because this state has gone backwards on affordability in the last 10 years, and if we don't change how we do things, we could become, very similar to the Bay Area in terms of average families just really have no feasible way to make it work here. And at the same time, I think this public safety challenge, it's really, I think it takes no political courage to criticize the other party. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. Where I think it takes political courage is actually criticize your own party. And that's what I feel like my main role in Olympia is, to have the political courage to admit when we as Democrats are not getting something right. We are not getting public safety right. I think that's a lot because we're not being the financial partner we need to be at the local level to actually make progress on public safety. And so those are my main two things, I think, of why I'm running for governor, is I want to see progress on affordability and public safety. I think it can happen. I think you get the right person in that office, you can make progress on those issues. And when you make progress on those issues, I think it'll benefit everybody in the state, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. These are not Republican or Democratic issues. These are Washington state issues that we need to make progress on, and I'm optimistic we can do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.